Hello, welcome to the panel New Angles for Old Stories. First of all, I want to thank the Doc Campus for organizing this, and especially Manuela and Victoria. They are, without them, this wouldn't be happening. It's always a bit crazy to get all these distinguished people on a panel at the same time. So we have here 4 high-profile professionals involved in history programming, and today we will share with them some of the programs they have commissioned recently. And we have Mark Edwards from ARTE France, we have Martin Davidson from the BBC, we have Fabrice Puchault from France Television, and we have Tom Koch from PBS. Well, some of the questions that we try to answer today are why history programs continue always still to resonate with audiences around the world, how to find new angles on stories that audience are familiar with, but there's always something new that comes up. How to be innovative and not fall back in cliches, how important are anniversaries, etc., etc. So I want to start with Mark. Maybe you introduce a little bit what ARTE is doing in the history section.
Yeah, I work in a group of 8 commissioning editors, and the lead person on history is a woman named Anne Grolleron, and I contribute to history commissioning, special film series, and sort of adding to the historical offer. We do about 6 90-minute primetime historical films a year, and about 12 to 15 one-hour films, and then sometimes we do 3-part series, sometimes we do, in the case of co-productions, even longer series. And you know, I think answering the question, what are new approaches to old stories, I think that's a good question to ask, and I think many of the decisions that we make and many of the films we decide to back are because they're proposing new material, new archival material, a new way of telling the story, a new angle on a story that we might know something about, but the film is offering a more complete picture. And maybe we could just start with a couple of examples. One example that I don't have a clip from, but which was a film that was quite successful this year for us, was a film that I commissioned about the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. And the film, from informal terms, is fairly conventional, but what was new about it is that we could tell the story because of archival access today and access to people who are willing to talk on all sides of the story. We could tell the story from the Soviet KGB side, why the Soviet Union actually decided to go into Afghanistan, some of the KGB agents who were involved in the initial attack on the presidential palace, giving first-person eyewitness testimony, some of the American diplomats who were reacting to it, who were advising Brzezinski at the time, and then a bunch of the Afghan warlords who were obviously responding to the Soviet invasion, and who later became very important people in Afghan history and the conflict that has ensued.
So before we watch a clip, at which point you know that a proposal like this is something that could work for your channel?
Well, I think in my case, what I'm looking for is things that are contemporary history, post-World War II history that has real resonance with the geopolitical situation today. And you know, in going back and looking at what exactly happened in 1979, you see all of the pieces that were put into motion that really explain where we've gotten to today with Afghanistan, and the new material really was important for us making a decision. The director had access to Gorbachev. She'd done a portrait of Gorbachev, and she was able to bring in Gorbachev and have Gorbachev actually talk about how he's involved in the talks about invading the Soviet Union and the pullout.
Something he never did.
Afghanistan, yeah.
Apparently, something he never did. Apparently,
it's first time, yeah. First time. And then the other program that we can maybe show a clip of is it's a.
Well, let's just start with this one and then.
I don't have that one.
Oh, you don't have that one. Sorry, I thought you.
Yes. So another example is a film that we ran that won a few prizes at the History Festival, or won a prize at the History Festival in France in Pessac, about the negotiations to end the Vietnam War and the secret negotiations that were held behind the scenes between Kissinger and Le Duc Tho, excuse me, just outside of Paris. So let's just run that first Vietnam clip.
So there was no obvious anniversary to program this. What makes you commission this?
Well, I think that the director came in with, he was a correspondent for a newspaper, a French newspaper in Vietnam for 10 years. And he was also very close to the group in the French Communist Party that was housing the Vietnamese delegation at the time of the talks. And he basically said, listen, I've got access to tapes that are state secret in America. I have relationships with North Vietnamese authorities that will give us access to these tapes. And we can tell the story of how these negotiations played out while the war was going on and how much weight both Le Duc Tho and Kissinger were carrying on their shoulders as the war was escalating between 1970 and 1973. And so this is the intro to the film. You know, they came in, the directing team and the producers came in with a proposal to do animation for some of these sequences. I think it's modest animation, but it's stylistically interesting. It's a Vietnamese artist who was doing the animation, and that was important. And you know, I think there are 3 sequences in the films that are animated, and what you're able to do with this film is look at a very small piece of the Vietnam War and get inside it, show the inner workings of diplomacy. And there are always back-channel secret negotiations going on with any armed conflict. So my interest was, how can we make this back-channel negotiation resonate with what goes on in the world today? And how can we confront Kissinger, who's still alive, with the reality of the way these negotiations played out? So we got Kissinger, and we confronted him in the film with some of the passages of these exchanges that he'd had with Le Duc Tho. So you're dealing with, you know, history that's not entirely settled. And I think this is one example of one kind of thing that we want to do. You know, what's new about it is the archival material, some of the animation approach, and the small story that opens up into big history, which doesn't prevent us from doing other approaches. And there are many different ways and many different styles of historical films that we want to be interested in. And another example is a Vietnam series that we're involved in with Tom, and we'll speak about that a little later.
So this is programmed at what time?
This is second part of the evening. This one ran at about 10:30 in the evening and did very well for us. But our ratings expectations are fairly low compared to Fabrice, who's on the main French public broadcaster. ARTE has a niche audience, and you know, basically this did double what our average was, so we were all very happy, but it's still a very small, specialized segment. The other thing that I would add is that there's a lot of talk about who our audience is. You know, any broadcaster asks who their audience is, and you know, we know that the core of our historical audience is fairly old. They're you know, between 50 and 65, sometimes 70 years old, and the sort of accepted thought is that they're into World War II because that's what they know. And the fact is today, what people lived through who are now 65, 70 years old is the Vietnam War. So the demographic is now really fitting with our audience. And you know, the show was very successful in the morning. It was rebroadcast in the morning, at night. So it's confirmation that if we're looking post-World War II, we can find a real resonance with our audience.
So you choose two examples from the 70s. Is that what Doing History Slot is actually looking for, or?
No, it's one example, and we want to do a lot of different
things.
things.
The Afghanistan one is the second example.
Yeah,
but,
yeah. Yeah, there are two examples. And these are also subjective choices, and there's a certain amount in the way that we commission. You know, there are different people commissioning who have different sensibilities, and my particular sensibility is very oriented towards these kinds of stories. I think Anne, who's really leading history in our group, she ran the History Channel in France for 10 years, or the commissioning for the History Channel. So she's got a very wide perspective on what has been done and what's the going thing in history in France for the last 10 years. And she's you know, probably more focused on a much wider lineup of films.
Can you give us an example? Or?
Well, she's now looking at the Russian Revolution, and as 2017 is approaching, we're looking at a bunch of different projects about the Russian Revolution, and there's one that's that we're going to sign up for that is really about how revolutions are composed of chaotic situations, and it's the anti-big man makes history reading of the Russian Revolution. It's about how opportunities presented themselves and how the events of 1917 were in many ways totally unpredictable, and the chain of events, and how the Bolshevik leaders took advantage of those events.
We're talking about anniversaries later. Tom, you work on one of the biggest TV events ever, which is a new film series, 18 hours, done by Ken Burns on the Vietnam War. Can you give us a bit more insight on this?
Sure. Hi, everybody. First of all, I want to make one clarification. Unlike these three, I don't commission. I just have money. What I do is I put money into shows, and I'm actually a distributor and a co-financer and funder. So I want to make that clear. I don't have a slot. I don't have anything, but I can tell you sort of the PBS sort of universe and that sort of thing. And I want to just talk about that really briefly. PBS has sort of 5 ways into history projects or history programming, actually 4, because Ken Burns is one of the 5 ways in, and you're not going to replace Ken Burns, I don't think, but you should. There's a strand called American Experience. American Experience is a history strand that basically, as the title suggests, is stories about American history, but it does not have to be a story about a specific American topic. We've done projects on, profiles of Castro, or we're looking at certain Latin American things. It has to be something that Americans would understand. We did the Goebbels Experiment, which was a Michael Kloft film a number of years ago for Spiegel TV. We've done a number of ARTE projects that have gone through there. The point, though, is that it has to be something Americans would understand. An example of this is that many years ago they did a film on George Wallace. I don't know if anybody in this room knows who George Wallace is, and I couldn't sell the film around the world. It did amazingly well, and the filmmaker was pissed off because I couldn't sell it. And finally I said, well, this would be the equivalent of my mother watching in 2.5 hours on Jean-Marie Le Pen. And no one would know who Le Pen is in Iowa, where my mother lives. So I clearly have to find stuff that works for an American audience. And having said that, another one is sort of specials. We love doing big multi-hour specials, or specials that are big, ambitious, sort of standalone things. We're just completing a project with Martin on the Pilgrims that's been going for a long time. I don't know the status of it. I won't question that at that point, but that's a project. There are a lot of big BBC co-productions, and there's money we're doing. There's also projects we do, special projects that go straight to PBS. There's a big German-American project on looking at the IOC and the Nazis during the 36 games. Not the games itself, but a different take on the 36 games. So there's that kind of thing. There's the broadcasters of history and the producers are basically WGBH in Boston, WETA in Washington, with whom Martin's working on the Pilgrims Project, and then WNET in New York. They typically do more profiles of artists. I know a lot of these are co-productions with BBC that are artists, performers, that kind of thing. But it's the big specials, the multi-hour, sort of really big things. I'm talking to Mark, for example, on a number of projects. What Mark said was really important, and I think this is really important for me as a distributor, but also for PBS. And this goes to Christoph's question about the 70s. I think he's sort of alluding to that. I completely agree that we're looking for things that sort of resonate today. And it's hard for me to believe that, you know, the Vietnam War ended 45 years ago when in fact, when I was 9 years old, the Vietnam War, or the Second World War only ended 20 years ago. So this is like double history in a way, but really has never been examined thoroughly in the United States. We've done a number of different things, but has never been, there was a big series done a number of years ago, actually probably about 30 years ago, with the precursor to France 2 called Untitled. It was called Vietnam, A Television History, which was a 13-part series based on Stanley Cranau's Pulitzer Prize-winning book. Hugely successful for France Television, or Entendeur in those days, hugely successful for us. But that was the classic view of the war from the generals down. You know, the generals, the presidents, the decision-makers down. And what really has shifted over the years is the shift where a lot of the projects are from the bottom up. It's from the grunt, the GI, the person on the street, the citizen, that sort of thing, kind of going up. And that's been sort of what these things are. But interconnections, one of the things that we find is that over the last number of years, the projects, the Second World War has been baked, rebaked, cooked, recooked, and there's a lot still to say about it, but it's a long time ago, and we have other things that have interfered with our lives since, and the question ultimately is, how do we tell those stories? We're in a very complex, non-binary world after the Second World War, and how do you tell these very complex, non-binary, by I mean not a good hat, white hat, black hat, winner, loser, that kind of thing. Things are very gray and very, very difficult to sort of spell out. And I completely agree with Mark's comment about finding those shows like Afghanistan, or those projects that are the seeds of the things that create the interconnectivities, or the seeds of the conflicts that come later, and how to understand those things. So the Afghanistan film I'm very aware of, but I'm talking to Mark about a couple of other projects which are kind of in that same vein. Sort of things in the Middle East that happened at a certain time that sort of could potentially, and did potentially, lead to results of today. Sort of looking for those things. We're not looking to sort of make that obvious connection, but it's really kind of important to find those moments where there's an interconnectivity that affects both France, UK, the United States, Germany, and so forth, in not quite clearly that black and white winner-loser way, but in that much more subtle way of how things work. And now back to this Vietnam project. I mean, look, Ken Burns is renowned for making massive films. He's probably the biggest filmmaker in the United States, and in terms of both the length of his films and his stature, he's a master. We are making a series. It's going to be 18 hours long in the United States. Will air in 2017 on the Vietnam War. But when we say the Vietnam War, we're talking 1862 to 1985. So we're looking at the French experience. We're looking at the French departure. We're looking at the rise of Ho Chi Minh. We're then looking at the arrival of the Americans and the departure of the Americans, and then going 10 years beyond as Vietnam goes through a tremendous struggle and tremendous a period of who they are now that they've won. The question is, why would we do this now? Why would we do a film like this and this scale? We did Vietnam, A Television History long ago. But Vietnam, A Television History was a series that basically was, again, that top-down generals kind of thing. But I think one of the great still unhealed wounds in the United States has been the Vietnam War. It infects every decision that's been made at the Pentagon, at West Point, in the political lives of Obama, making decisions of whether to go to war in Iraq or whether to take troops back. It permeates everything. And I would argue in one way also that the Vietnam War was the last true world war. Not necessarily that it had the numbers of combatants that the Second World War obviously did, and not that it resulted in the same level of destruction and death, but on the scale that it in fact truly impacted everybody. Everybody in this room is impacted by the Vietnam War. Even though it was fought by the Americans, on the Allied side it was the Americans, the Australians, the Koreans, and some Brits, it basically was an American operation. But every protest, every event, everything that happened around the world was infused and somehow infected by the war. anti-war protests in Paris, anti-war protests in Stockholm, in London, all around the world were all at least had that one common element. And this is the first attempt to try to sort of really understand the war in its totality. What did it mean? Why did it happen? What did it do? It's not going to cover everything, and it is from an American and a North Vietnamese perspective. The film is loaded. About 40%, 30% of the footage is all North Vietnamese footage you've never seen. Interviews with North Vietnamese citizens, North Vietnamese soldiers, North Vietnamese generals, politicians who've never spoken before. This is really epic in that scale. I've been working on this for 7 years. We're trying to do everything with this, but we obviously know that for an international market that we can't. I mean, no one's going to buy 18 hours, except in the U.S. So we're very fortunate right now that ARTE has come in to basically they've pre-bought the film, and basically they're going to assist us in making the international version. And Mark is going to oversee that, which is really great. And if I can convince Martin to be the partner to help us do that, it would be even better. But the idea here is the film has 4 elements that are really a great surprise to me. One is the music. Every single piece of music from the 60s and 70s is in here. Every major star, the Beatles, the Stones, Dylan, everybody's contributed their music to this thing. It's never, ever happened before. Second is the footage is completely unusual. It's never been seen. Third thing is really something that is, I don't want to say near and dear to my heart, but I think is necessary, me personally, is it's a very bloody film. One of the things I believe has happened over the years with a lot of historical films about war is it's been sanitized, it's been turned into, we've fetishized it, and we've somewhat made it clean. There's nothing clean in this film, in that sense. There's a lot of blood. You really see and are immersed in the horrors of what really went on from the French experience, that the Americans financed, by the way, up to the American experience and beyond. And lastly is what I'd said before, is the totality of how this war infected all of us. Those who were in favor, those who were against, those who protested, those who were thousands of miles away, it infected every one of us. And that's why I claim it's sort of the last world war, per se. If we had seen the stuff, the whole notion about the Vietnam War was body count. You win by virtue of how many bodies you shoot and kill. And it became absurd. I remember as a kid watching news every night, and there would be the Walter Cronkite saying, you know, tonight 16 Americans died and 3,000 North Vietnamese, proving we're winning. But you never saw the bodies. Had we seen the bodies, the protests might have been even more immense. The last thing I want to say about this is that between 65 and 70, all of his iconic moments, from the March on Washington to you know, the 2 assassinations of King and RFK, to Woodstock even, to all of his stuff, we kind of see these as kind of set pieces. This is the first time I've ever seen it all integrated into one big piece that really brings it to home. And that 5 years, I was a young boy. I can't speak for Martin or Mark or Fabrice, but I'm glad I didn't live through it because the turmoil was so insane. And you see it in this first time. I mean, it's a really amazing film in that respect.
So you say it took 7 years to make this. So this decision to do it as an 18-hour film was made like 7 years ago?
No, that decision was made when, Mark? I think it was made when we were in New Hampshire. Mark came over about a month ago. We had a major screening. It was originally scheduled, I think it'd be 14. And I think it's gotten up to 18 at this point.
So who's making these decisions? Ken Burnsey has unlimited money and airtime on PBS, or how is that? How does that work?
I don't know about the unlimited money, but I think the airtime, yeah. I mean, I put it this way. I believe that this film, at least in the United States, will be the most talked about film of the year, if not of the decade. This will surpass the war he did, the Civil War, which was one of the great, I mean, the biggest projects ever on PBS in terms of ratings. I think this one will go leaps and bounds beyond that. And I'm not saying that as a wishful prediction. I just think that's where we are with this. I agree with Mark that this is a history that not only are the older viewers looking at today, that they're sort of the 65-year-olds, But this, in the United States, is still the great unhealed wound of the 20th century. The other being race relations. But, and I don't know if you saw the Black Panthers film that we aired or has been screened here. If you didn't, it's too bad, because I mean, what's happening in the United States now with the police brutality and the murders of young black men and so forth is exactly why the Black Panthers were created back then. And that's why we did the Black Panthers film. I mean, we didn't know that Ferguson was going to happen or Baltimore, but we thought we have to go back and understand these guys. So, yeah. So,
Mark, what can you tell us a little bit? How did you convince ARTE to come into this? And you're doing a shorter version, but what will you let out? And no,
I don't think
Mark. I said Mark.
Oh, sorry.
Don't worry.
Did I say Martin? Sorry, I was like, no, Mark here. Yeah, and what are you letting out is like the more American aspects of the story, or how do you do that?
Well, just first to respond to the nature of the film, the storytelling, and those who are looking for trends in storytelling. I think, you know, what Ken Burns is trying to do here is really epic storytelling, and it's bottom up, top down. It's especially the Vietnamese side and the American side. And the Vietnamese side, a lot of the material and a lot of the testimony is really original. So I think there was enough of an original approach to Vietnam, and despite the fact that we'd done that other film recently, that I could bring people to the table. And then I think there's a real commitment to work with Ken Burns and show his work in France on ARTE, in France and Germany. The war was very successful in 2008, was it?
Yeah.
And there was a special screening in Cannes at the Cannes Film Festival of the war. So the history between Ken Burns and ARTE goes back, and the question this time was, could we get in earlier, and could we help shape the film and then help shape the international version and think about what the international version could be? And you know, I was very fortunate to be invited to do this last screening, and you know, what I managed to get going to the management at ARTE in Strasbourg was to say, okay, you know, we think it's going to come in at 18 hours in the States. What's the amount of real estate that we can give up for an epic story? And we settled at 6 hours. And you know, the challenge now is to figure out what we'll keep for the 6 hours and how to do that. And I think, you know, there are individual storylines that are through lines throughout the film, and very strong characters that we obviously want to keep. Even though they're quite American storylines, but they're very compelling soldier stories. There's a lot about the international reaction, and obviously that resonates that much stronger for us. And you know, I think the answer to the question of how we'll get to the international version is still an open question. We're talking about it.
We've got a lot of time, by the way.
Yeah.
This isn't going to air until 2017, so we've got.
Yeah. But it's a very interesting problem to solve. I think it's a little painful for the filmmakers.
That's why we're leaving it in your hands, Mark.
So how does it actually work? The 6 hours that you do for ARTE, are you having the rights for them to sell them internationally? Because no one is going to buy 18 hours. I mean,
no. The notion is we want the version that comes out of Mark and Ken and Lynn Novick, who is the lead producer on it. What comes out of their handiwork will be the piece that will be seen around the world. Now, if somebody wants 18, I'm not going to say no, but
okay.
You know, that's the idea.
Good. We have only 90 minutes, and I want you to have the chance also to ask questions at the end. Fabrice, was there any competition between France Television and ARTE on this, or
no?
Why?
18 hours?
No, 18 hours would not necessarily be a problem for us, in fact, because we're doing, you know, 6 to 8 special a year. Each one is from 2 hours to 8 hours, talking about history. But the fact is that we, for this story, we have the apocalypse brand. We made Apocalypse World War II, Apocalypse Hitler, Apocalypse World War I, and we are currently finishing Apocalypse Stalin, and we are currently producing Apocalypse Cold War. So Vietnam War will be a part of it, and it's an 8-part series. So that's the reason why, well, we stay faithful to our own brand. And even though, Tom, you did not come to us, but, well, that's the reason why. There will not be competition between us, and it's good to have different programs on different channels. And, but the main point is certainly that this idea of a brand, in fact, is linked to the idea of the event. In fact, to answer your question, our problem is not the topic, the subject. I think we are the only one to be bored, for instance, with World War II. We are the only one, because the figures, the demography of our audience is fascinating. The Apocalypse World War II was the youngest program on the major channel.
What do you mean by that, the youngest?
The youngest when it comes to documentary.
Oh.
It was the youngest program. The average was 45, meaning that, in fact, we had a lot of people from 14 to 25, which is really rare. So, in fact, there is an appetite for history, first. Second, the key for us is the event. We have, as we are France 2, we are the second channel in France, and we have an average of 14% market share. The average of the documentary special is around 17% market share. So we are above the average of the channel, and we try also to collect a large audience, meaning all kind of audiences for a program. That's the goal. So we have to make events. Make events meaning that we have to be connected with anniversary, commemoration, ceremonies first, but not necessarily. Then we also have to make events in another way. The most important thing is, in fact, the subject is less important than the storytelling. Innovation in storytelling is the key point. Apocalypse at this time, we are talking about 2008, was very innovative because of the storytelling, because of colorization, because of the sound. The sound was amazing, and it was the first, I think, really immersive experience during a war. And that led to the success of the first series. That was totally amazing. Each episode was more than 7 million viewers, which is in France the maximum you can have, apart from a France-Brazil football game. But apart from that, it's the maximum you can have. The brand is also global, so we are telling the story of wars on all territory. It's not only about France and Germany, or because, well, we were defeated, and but it's also because everything. And the idea was to collect, to make an event. We thought that we have to give a new way of telling stories. So immersive was the point of Apocalypse. Second point was half of the program should be made of totally unseen archives. So it means big budget. It means 17 researchers all around the world searching for new archives. And we were lucky at that time because it was the time where, in fact, family archives were opened. The grandfather were dying. And so for the first time, we found, for instance, archives that was shot by the Einsatzgruppen in the eastern country. It was the first time we saw this archive, personal archives of the crime. Or, well, a lot of personal archives that help us also to do a third thing, which is to tell the story from the bottom. It was one of the first to tell the story. There are never one first, but one of the first to tell the story from the bottom, from the daily life. What is to live a life during World War II. Then, so that brings us the idea of also to create an event, it's a strategy. It's also a strategy of combining the schedule of the channel with the film, with the documentary. And now, each time we are showing a big special, we are, in fact, connecting the content with all the news report, even all the magazines and the news on the channel are talking about it. Not doing commercial and not doing communication, but talking about the topics, and it helps a lot. So it's also a strategy. We have now a YouTube channel. We have a special YouTube channel for Apocalypse, and where we do a lot of preview of some excerpts. For instance, you can see it will be next week excerpt of the next Apocalypse that will be shown, in fact, in October. But and it also helped to change a bit the demography of these films. And so innovation in storytelling, it means that to create an event, it's not only ceremony anniversary, but to say to the audience, you've never seen it that way. We will never do a subject, an unknown subject. For a special, we will not do that. We will do that for all-night show, but not for a big primetime special that should find at minimum 4 million viewers. So the subject must immediately ring a bell for the audience. But so we have to tell them, you've never seen it that way. And you've never seen it that way means that we have new historical research, but also really a new way of showing history. So one of all problems in our history, if we are lucky, we have a very rich history, but before Les Frères Lumière, we don't have images. So what can we do? We can do docudramas. We made docudramas about Louis XIV and Versailles, about, well, but, well, we should find also another way to do it. We looked at the American Story of Us with a lot of interest. So special effect plus interview. It could be a way. But we saw something. In fact, we were inspired by an Israeli film about the Sabra and Shatila slaughter. And I forget the name. Waltz with Bashir. And so we thought, let's try animation. I think you have one project like that for World War I.
Yes.
Yeah. And so we did, okay, let's go back to history. There is a quote in French, we say, nos ancêtres les Gaulois. Of course, our ancestors are not Gallics. It's a say. So we said, okay, let's try to make the film about the Gaul. Let's try to make the film about Caesar. So if we can run the clip. It's composed with a normal animation plus, comment dire? What is the system? Well, I forget.
It's like motion capture.
Motion capture plus total animation. Part of the crew is coming from the Assassin's Creed license.
So why animation and not reenactment? Or I mean,
because it was the idea of the director. Let's bring that, and you see in this example, it's not what happened. It's in fact the memory.
People are tired about reenactment. So
no,
you have to
I
find
don't
something
think
new,
so.
or what is the,
I don't
what's
think
the reason?
so.
Yeah.
I think that when you don't relate to a ceremony or you don't relate with a big central figure, you need to really say to the audience, hey, come and watch. Tonight, this is the biggest show on TV tonight. And something really you've never seen that way. So the film will be composed of something like 30% of shots of France and north of Italy and Switzerland now. Just to say to the audience, don't forget, it's downstairs. It's just under you, where you walk, are the path, are the ways, are the fortress where the legions were and where the Gallic warriors were. So the idea is, and it was in fact the best idea coming from directors, not from us. So men came and say, I've made a little film in Belgium with that. Don't you think we can try something? Then he came the next time with some people from Assassin's Creed license. And they tried to do something. Then the third time they came with the main historian on the period, an authority. And so because we have also to say to our audience, this is the historical truth at this point. And of course it will create surprise for the audience. So surprise, the best show in town tonight in a way, something you've never seen that way. So key elements for an event. And of course we have a huge internet as we are working with Ubisoft. We have a huge internet work that will be in place before the broadcast. So I think history can, I don't know, will it be a success or a failure? I frankly don't know. And sometimes it works, this kind of, but sometimes it does not. We have to remake something like...
Does it have historians in it, or is it just
no.
pure
It
fiction?
has locations,
yes, yeah.
real locations, but beautifully shot. Some archaeological fields.
And
where
narration.
Narration and dialogues. Dialogues, because we have animation, so you can... And so we have to try to find a way to make dialogues that would be accurate, and that was a difficulty. So event, meaning ceremony, meaning meaning a new way of innovation and storytelling, and we need to find that. There is another example, and which is okay. Let's come back to archives, and that's a kind of French specialty. No expert, no interview, just archives. But an unknown subject. There is something strange enough. Only BBC has made a film at this time to the period of time. I think it's current. You are maybe not you, but you are currently doing. It's just 9th of May, 1945. Then you have 60 million people on the road. And Europe does not exist anymore. Everything is destroyed. It's the most massive transfer of population of all times at this time of history. No, it's the New Year's Eve in China. But at this time of its history, it's the most massive. But nothing left, only horror. Horror and horror. No food. And, well, totally, in fact, untold story. And so we tried to make a film. So untold story without a ceremony could be an example. So, but it has to be driven by a very strong emotional narration. So we can maybe try this one.
More clip
the
then.
second one. After Hitler, it's called. Such a stupid title because we wanted to make a film about the building of Europe, in fact.
Hitler.
No, no, I don't want this title.
Okay.
So that's it in a way. So
great. We come back to all of this when we have time. Martin, does any of these programs that we have seen so far, we talked about, would inspire you or would fit with the BBC? But you are in charge of science and history at the BBC, and you're doing also fiction, not only documentaries.
Yeah, we do. Well, I recognise all the challenges and dilemmas that are being described. Particularly for the BBC, I think there are a number of broadcasters who have the same commitment to public service content without becoming niche. It's really, really hard to do both. It's very easy to be niche, and it's very easy to be completely commercial. It's quite hard to remain true to the idea that one has a relationship with the other. So, I mean, I've got various clips, but I'm going to, in the spirit of this, rather than doing kind of broad show reel type things, I'm going to go into one example of what I think, I'd like to think was an example of telling an old story in a new way. So I had the obligation, as we all do, there are anniversaries, and some anniversaries are merely mathematical, arithmetic coincidences. It's a year with a zero since X happened can be significant. Others feel more like they do speak to the zeitgeist. And I think last year, rather earlier this year, we did feel that the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz was a resonant moment, more resonant perhaps than you'd have thought 5, 6, 7 years ago, with the rise of anti-Semitism, with the world once again polarizing around issues of identity and race and all of those things that you thought, God help us, that whole episode had consigned to history, and it hadn't. So the logic there is, all right then, if we are going to do something that takes the Holocaust, there is a subject that has been done to death. So the series of steps that we took to come up with the program I'm going to show you a clip from now was First of all, I thought the anniversary was worth doing properly rather than merely getting something out of the archive and putting it out late at night. So I wanted to commission some material that felt new. I was also interested in, alongside the survivors' stories, I was interested in the perpetrators. I think that's, that remains the single biggest enigma around the Holocaust, not just how on earth did people survive. They're the first people, in my experience, to say, I have no idea how I survived. But the real question is, how did we, Western white Europeans, did we see in our own traditions a logic that culminated in Auschwitz? So I was interested in the perpetrators. But I also wanted to do something that unpacked a particular moment, that didn't just get lost in the morass of the general. So I was quite receptive to ideas, and a drama producer came to pitch me the Eichmann story, Adolf Eichmann, and I have to say, I rolled my eyes a bit. I just thought, the thing about Adolf Eichmann, I've seen reconstructions of that kidnapping from Buenos Aires. I've seen it done an awful lot. And he started originally pitching a three-part drama. Part one, 1944, Eichmann at the head of his power with that bloody map, with railways, the height of the enormity of the crime, the Hungarian Jews being sent to Auschwitz. So this was a snapshot of Eichmann at his most powerful. Act two would be the kidnapping, and what intrigued the director was the idea of the evil man surrounded by his loving family. It is, yes, it's a paradox. There is that thing about the Nazi experience that always beguiles you, which is how did these people murder children all day and go home to their own? And the third act would be the extraordinary story of how it was televised in 1961. And not just filmed, but televised. And I thought, actually, that's really interesting. So we dumped the first two, which I've seen a million times before, and we decided, let's do a drama of the story of how it was televised. So what I was after in doing that, the thing that made it appeal to me was, I didn't know the story, that the two producers, the main producer who persuaded the Israeli government to let him put television cameras into the courtroom, was a blacklisted Jewish communist director who had invented the whole discipline of the multi-camera studio set up for news. He'd worked for CBS in the late 40s, been blacklisted as politically unacceptable in America. So the risk of employing this man was absolutely extraordinary. And what he brought to the task of televising the Eichmann trial was more than simply, how do I solve the logistical problems of an outside broadcast? I'll do a trial next week, I'm doing the Eurovision Song Contest. It wasn't. He came with a mission that he was going to, with his television cameras in that very modern way, was show the face of evil. And he was going to peel away the mask of the man in the glass dock and leave the world wiser about who these people were who had committed this enormous crime. So what I liked about that as an idea was, I think there's some layers there. One is, you've got the anniversary. Second, you've got the question of perpetrators. Third, you've got a very specific moment to unpack, which I think for drama gives you something specific, gives you something tangible, it gives you something fresh. You don't know the story. And third, it gives you, without sounding too pretentious, a bit of a meta-narrative. It gives you the moment when a war crime became the Holocaust. In 1961, in that courtroom, Adolf Eichmann was presented to the world as the first time we got a long, hard look at what this man was, this génocidaire. Who are these people? We were used to, after Nuremberg, we knew what the First Division horrors looked like, the Goerings and the Speers and the Kaltenbrunners. What we didn't know were the people, the actual lever pullers. So putting all of that together, I just thought we've got something that might just deliver something quite fresh and quite modern, because the moment you do, what did it mean to be televised, you've got two narratives going on. You're invited back to 1961, which was the moment that the world got its first long, horrifying look at what this thing was. And what it produced was a drama that we then did. So technically, for the directors in the room, this is a really interesting exercise of how you can now mix archive and drama. How do you unpick the particularity of a particular historical moment and turn it into drama? So I'm going to ask if we can run this, the Eichmann show clip. The scene carries on where, and they're both real, Milton Friedman, who's played there by Martin Freeman, Milton is still alive. Leo Hurwitz is now long dead, who's played by Anthony LaPaglia. And the scene, that's a real scene, and we know it happened, because they're arguing, you cost us ratings, we're fighting with Bay of Pigs, Castro, with all these world events, to keep, and Yuri Gagarin, to keep this trial on mainstream television in 37 countries. So there's a brilliant parallel between what they were doing then and what we're trying to do, which is how do you keep the Holocaust relevant to people's living rooms? And I love that mixture. I just thought that felt quite modern. It felt you would recognise the challenges of the television world. And Paul Anderson, the director, did the most extraordinary job mixing archive and a set of actually filmed in Lithuania. So that to me is an example of how you take an old story and you tell it in a way that's new. And at the end, there's the most extraordinary sequence, because it starts off being all the logistics, and the Israelis wouldn't let them put television cameras in the room, didn't want it to be a media circus. So there's an extraordinary scene. They had 2 days to build special alcoves to shoot through chicken wire from another room, so you weren't aware of the cameras in the auditorium. So it starts off being a how do you skin the cat kind of piece, and you're thinking, really, it's a film about the Holocaust and we're worrying about camera positions. Is this really the right perspective? And what grows out of it is there's 3 amazing moments. The first is the testimonies. So there are 3 or 4 testimonies that we've recut and revoiced. The translator's voice, that's all been done again to kind of really, that's a robotic, effectless way of talking, I think is even more powerful. And the second stage is when Eichmann is shown the archive. So this is the first, there's an amazing duality goes on, which is you're watching Eichmann, watching the archive of his own handiwork at the same time as the world is watching it. And the fusion between the 3 is an extraordinary experience of thinking there was that moment in 1961 when nobody knew what this stuff looked like. And then the third element is when Eichmann himself is cross-examined. And there's an amazing exchange between Hausner, the Israeli, the chief prosecutor, who keeps asking him, do you think that Rudolf Höss, the commandant of Auschwitz, was he a criminal? And Eichmann has to weasel his way around never answering the question. So by the end of the piece, you have long since left behind where it starts, which is how do you do a telly outside broadcast. And what you're left with is doing the same thing that the world did in 1961, and it's taunted us ever since, which is what happens when you look the man in the face? What do you see? And the answer is, well, I don't know what who knows? Who knows? I think there is no answer to Eichmann. That's the trouble. I sometimes think he's a sphinx guarding an empty safe. There's nothing there. But watching him twitch his mouth minute after minute after minute, because Leo, the studio director, said, I'm going to put the most powerful telephoto lens on a TV camera, and I'm just going to stare him out. And you think, what an extraordinary thing for a television director to think television could do. So at the end of it, whatever else you've got to look at the face of evil. So that was an example where
was that the initial proposal to mix
yes.
archive and fiction? Or?
Yeah. Okay. It was always going to, because the archive of because it was filmed, it was televised. Mm-hmm. So the telecine still exists. So it seemed like, but in the original drama, the person who produced it, Lawrence Bowen, he thought this was Act 3 of a 3-part drama. And what we did, so ditch the first 2 acts. They're far too ambitious. But the really interesting moment is Act 3. Because actually it allows you, the viewer, to make your own conclusions. Whereas I've seen a lot of reconstructions of the Mossad kidnapping and various terrible attempts to kind of reconstruct, Wannsee conferences and Nazi bigwigs being Nazi bigwigs. And it's almost impossible to do. So I think that for me is an example where you can take an old story, but you have to find within it the germ of what you're going to base your modern retelling out of. Because I think one of the things that's very tempting for us all to do who work in this area is try and throw particular bells and whistles at how you do it. And that can work. I think the colorizing thing is extraordinary. I think, it's no coincidence that everything that gets colorized rates through the roof. And the purists may object, but the quality of stuff you're seeing now does make you think that is an amazing technique in and of itself. So it can work, but I think always if you've got something, if you've got a germ of something that's latent in the story, then the retelling of it in a new way will differentiate itself. It will feel real rather than artificial.
We have 15 minutes left. Are there any questions from the audience?
You know, we used that same effect in a film about J. Robert Oppenheimer in the trials when he was effectively thrown out. I mean, he was the inventor of the atom bomb, and then obviously he was found to be not suitable for the American government. Later on, Edward Teller went after him, and during the trials, we kind of used that same. Not quite the same. I think yours is more effective because you've got two things going on. You've got the trial in the front, and then you've got the TV guys in the back. Two actions happening. But we tried a similar effect, and it did work in that case.
Well, there's a reason for that, which is that courtrooms, like boardrooms, like meetings, are already theatre. Yeah. You're dramatizing, people are already wearing masks, they're performing roles, there's an audience, there's a sense of spectacle. So in a sense, you're accentuating something that's already happening, rather than trying to create the whole reality from scratch.
Right.
Hi there. Do you ever feel sort of trapped by these brands? I feel like history is kind of reduced to these kind of key moments, the Nazis and the mummies and the World War II, and I'm not saying they're not important, but I'm sort of kind of interested, maybe I'm at the wrong session, I'd be interested in the new stories, the new old stories. I feel like and I work in development and I'm familiar with these techniques. When I begin to think of an idea, I'll start reaching for them myself, but you kind of dress them up and kind of reinvent them, and we'll have rotoscope this, and we'll do some motion capture here, and we'll do some colorization here, and whatever. But essentially, you're kind of ringing or you're flogging the same, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, and these are very well-crafted programs, but you're kind of flogging the same dead horse, you know, you're kind of revisiting the same subjects. And actually, with respect to, I feel that less with the BBC's output, and done some great stuff on the suffragettes recently, and things, you know, really interesting stuff. But generally, when I look at international history documentaries, I think they're just awful. I feel like I've seen it all before. It seems so tired. So tired.
Can I show you a 2-minute clip that will defy that?
Can I just complete my, because I did listen patiently to your sales pitch for the Vietnam program.
Because I'm not a native English speaker, could you speak a bit louder?
I beg your pardon, sorry.
No.
And I just feel that isn't there more you could do as commissioners to really show the audience something new? That there's lots of other things going on in history, quite apart from these kind of big tentpole moments. Don't you have a kind of responsibility to kind of lead the audience rather than to simply give them more of what they want? I know it sounds naive. I mean, I've worked in television 25 years, and you know, I've worked for companies where we have to jump through the development hoops. I can be as cynical and opportunistic as the next person, but I'd like not to be, and I'd like to see people in your position, you know, pushing the boat out.
But you know, you're right. You're just in the middle of our contradiction. Of course you're right. Of course we think about, I don't know for you, but I'm sure we think about that all the time. But
does anybody else agree with me, by the way?
Yeah, but it's the center of...
If anybody agrees with me, can you put your hand up? Come on, declare. Oh, okay. Okay, no, I'm going to pass this.
Fine. Yes, he's taking over.
Good.
That's funny.
I do know what you mean, but I think this panel has been addressing that issue quite specifically in various ways, like the Vietnam story, for instance. I grew up and, you know, protesting at university and all of that, the bombing of Cambodia. I'd be very interested to see that told in a different way.
Can you just wait for the microphone so we all hear what you're saying?
I mean, I'm sure it'd be absolutely brilliant series and award-winning, but at the end of the day, it's like, Yeah, right. Okay. Tell me something that I really don't know, that I really haven't seen. Take me.
Have you really seen...
Too much history programming is about prescribed periods in history that we know the audience are interested in, and we just flog them to death. And, you know, the producers are brilliantly inventive in actually creating these programs.
Yeah, but research marches on, and research, I think, keeps throwing up the ability to perhaps tell the story in a slightly newer way or better way. Like, we haven't seen that North Vietnam footage before.
And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. All I'm saying is, you know, aren't we neglecting a lot of other things? And,
yeah,
you know,
possibly.
it's like, okay, you know, I mean, I've done development, and I've sat around trying to think of programs about
maybe
Adolf Hitler.
because we were talking about the big screen. I mean, in France we use this comparison with multiplex theaters. You have the big room and the little one. For instance, for us, we have on France Télévisions the big room, which is prime time, big prime time France 2, but we have also the little room, which is 10:30 on France 2 or France 3. And for instance, France 3 is doing for years an incredible job with one of the best directors in the world, called Riti Pan, about the genocide in Cambodia. And it's nothing to do with that. But I think, you know, it's just exactly what Martin Davidson says. You cannot choose between giving a show for a large audience and quality and intelligence and history. And then you have also to take care of the progress of historical research. And that's the reason why maybe it's not to answer totally, it will not answer totally to your question, but that's the reason why we are, for me, doing what you call template. But we have also other rooms in the multiplex to show things that maybe will be on the agenda little by little and will be templates in 5 years. But it already exists. It's just an example to make something like, I think Riti has made for France 3 6 films about the Cambodia Genocide, the Khmer Rouge, the Red Khmers. And, well, it's a masterpiece in itself, and it builds little by little, but to be built that way, you need to be a bit quiet and not to be on the ring in front of the Mike Tyson, I mean CSI, I mean the huge American ABC, CBS, NBC series, and so on. You need to be a bit more free, and Riti has the possibility to be totally free, and then to build something totally different. I don't know. I know it's a contradiction.
I think I'd just add one thing, if I could.
Yeah.
It's not a choice between one or the other. It's finding a balance.
Yeah, I just think... Sorry, go on. Reflecting on that last question, I think there is, you're right, there is a huge danger, I think, in the perhaps some over-sensationalizing ways of telling an old story, which isn't really a new way of telling it, it's just sensationalizing an old way. And I think that's the danger, and if you see you know, cliched effects being added to an old story just to try and retread it, then that's a very real danger.
No, I mean, I entirely appreciate what you're saying. I mean, the kind of surfeit of pharaohs and furors is you know, it is depressing. And I mean, I think there are two answers to that. There's new subjects, certainly, but they are difficult to an audience of people who don't, for whom the word history is not a turn on, who didn't wake up this morning determined that in the next 24 hours they would increase their historical knowledge. So, you know, we are in the business of not being a niche. If you're in a niche, that's fine. You can put, you know, if you're in a museum, you can put anything on your loop you like. So there is a problem there, but we do have to replenish those watering holes that everyone goes back to time and time again, get drier and drier. I absolutely appreciate that. As I say, there are two ways of doing that. You either do find new approaches to what feel like bigger subjects. You know, when you're talking about the After Hitler clip, we did a film. I was commissioning for VE Day, for the anniversary of VE Day, and I was very keen that what we didn't do was end up with a lot of knees up Mrs. Brown, as though the whole of World War II only took place in the East End. So we've got lots of people, dancing around Trafalgar Square, and that's absolutely brilliant. But I was also quite determined, as you were, to go, well, what about the story that began on the 9th of May? And we did a film called Savage Peace, which began with the most extraordinary archive I've ever seen in my life, which I would not budge from the first minute, which is why we lost our 9 o'clock slot, had to go out at 10 o'clock, which was 41 German civilians, including a family of Swedes who were guilty of speaking German, being rather sort of hesitantly marched up a hill on the outskirts of Prague and sort of lined up and sort of shot. And then driven over, a lorry drives over the bodies backwards and forwards. And this was all shot because somebody in the Czech resistance knew somebody in a block of flats who had a little cine camera, said, you need to film this. And from then, what was then described was what happened. And no moral equivalence was being drawn. Nobody was saying, do you know what, actually the Germans are victims in this story. I mean, they clearly were, but, you know, the context of what had happened before then is fucking obvious. But the point about the film was it did offer a very stringent, corrective perspective on what you think you know. And I think that's valid. And I think there are lots of examples where one can do that. Completely new subjects. Well, I'll just come to you in a sec. I've been really watching and enjoying the drama on BBC4 called 1864 about Denmark, the Danish, the Schleswig-Holstein wars I knew nothing about. And why is that fascinating? Because it was made by Danes, so it has a completely different sense of what is nationalism. What are Danes thinking in 1860? Why do they think God's on their side? And what is it like to fight Bismarck and the Germans? Understood to be a completely different type of realpolitik from the one you're used to. It's shot differently, it has completely different grammar, it's brilliantly made. So from that point of view, I absolutely relish, and it's interesting, it's often drama that can do that. Take you into a world, and I love the fact I know nothing about those wars, and that's the huge pleasure in that. So long as you're talking, you know, the multiplex analogy is a good one. BBC4 that's you know, you've gone to the Renoir to watch something rather than the Odeon.
You know, your comment is this is
have
precisely why we took 1864. Exactly
did you
why
as well?
you, yes,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly why you did. Exactly.
Let's do one more question over there.
I got a quick observation, actually. The pendulum swings from one end to the other, not content-wise, but pretty much about the style. When I do remember Vietnam War, Steven Spielberg film, I think Private Ryan, it was very graphically pornographic, showing the violence. And today, again, the Vietnam War is very graphic. And also Frantz Fanon, the documentary about the violence, is again very graphic, very explicit. But the real issue is here the documentation, let's say Vietnamese war. Why we've been kept always in ignorance? For example, this gentleman is saying that we never seen such footage. But for Vietnamese war, there are certain footages. For example, uranium bombs planted to certain villages, and thousands of people died, but nobody hardly knows of those. So why documentary makers confessing why they do select certain footages and why they do demonstrate as such? And second obstacle, I think, before our illumination is the nation-state issue. For example, again, in Vietnam, why do we have only a one-dimensional narration? There is a Vietnamese dimension, for example, in equally balanced base. And why, you know, there's no attempt such an originality among your productions? Sorry, this is a little bit skeptical dimension.
It's a very good question, Willie. Who wants to go?
Well, Mark, take it. You saw the film.
Yeah, I think one of the great things about what Burns is trying to do is represent the Vietnamese point of view that's never been represented, and he's gone to great lengths to gather testimony, to gather footage, and to get access to stories of massacres from the Vietnamese side. And you know, it's telling the story from both sides that in many of these projects is what makes it new.
I mean, with respect to the specific of the, you know, a specific selection of bombs in villages or something, I can't comment on that, but this film is deliberately attempting to show all sides of this war, which makes it both unique. And then the question is, why haven't we done it before? We never had access. It took him over 7 years to gain access to get the footage and the cooperation. It's hard to make a documentary film archive-based if you can't get the archive. I mean, so it took him a long time, and finally they're coming around, and finally they've cooperated at least to give it access to it. It's not a question of not wanting to. You just had to wait to get it.
But the question you ask is the question of the point of view. First, the first thing is that a film has to be made by a director, and you will have a strong film if one director has a strong point of view, and you cannot reject that. Second, you mentioned Frantz Fanon, who said the history of Africa will be totally different when it will be told by African. And you're right, and that is totally true. And that's the reason we tried, that's the reason why I mentioned Ritipan with Cambodian, and its own version of the genocide, and this is also why it is so precious. It doesn't mean you need to be one of them to tell the story, but it means that, of course, we need also this totally strange point of view, strange for us Westerners. For instance, we tried to make a huge series about the history of Africa on France 5, told only by African, directed by an African director and told by African historian, and it's true, it's really different. It's really different. It's history, you know, these historians are amazing scholars and graduated of all university in the world, but the history is different. And then we are currently doing a docudrama about slavery, about the triangle trade, and one of the main questions was who will tell the story. So in fact, the scriptwriter came. The scriptwriter is from Paris, but he came one day with Moussa Touré, maybe you don't know, he's a drama director. He had 2 films in Cannes, who is from Senegal. And it was very important for him to say the story of this French and Brit, who made more than fortune. It's the equivalent of what internet is today, the fortune they make at this period of time, just because they were trading, with no responsibility at all for them, trading. And of course, so the script became different. And so we had to try to mix, not in the same film, because in a film you cannot mix all the point of views, it's impossible, or you do a blah, 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 I don't know what the word would be in bouillie in English, but we need to have this recognition of the fact that history is also storytelling, and this is generally the storytelling of the Westerners. You're right.
Well, we need a second part of this session because we have to wrap it up right now. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks for Doc Campus for organizing this, and thanks for the audience too. Thank you.